Joseph Smith claimed to be a prophet of God, but he got a lot of things wrong. We're going to talk about why 4 gods make him a false prophet in today's episode of Light from the Past. Today is the 23rd of April, 2024. My name is Dewayne Bryant, and I'd like to welcome you to Light from the Past, a podcast dedicated to exploring archaeology, history, and biblical faith. Christianity is an historical religion. The Bible makes claims about people, places, and events located in real time and space that can be checked against the historical and archaeological records. If the Bible's true, then there should be at least some independent confirmation of its contents. Over the last 2 centuries, the Bible has fared very well. Archaeological discoveries and investigations of historical records have both shown that the biblical authors recorded things accurately. In fact, many times when we hear a criticism of the Bible, we usually only have to sit back and wait, and the evidence will come along shortly. There have been many cases where this has happened. But the Bible isn't the only holy book that contains historical data. Other religions have similar texts, and one example is Mormonism. Like the Bible, claims in the Book of Mormon can be analyzed in light of surviving evidence. Unlike the Bible, the Book of Mormon and other Mormon scriptures have fared very poorly when their contents have been scrutinized by scholars. The evidence has actually made it quite difficult for Mormon believers. Their scriptures, for instance, describe flora, fauna, technology, even entire civilizations that did not exist in the New World. One important Mormon text is the Book of Abraham. Not all branches of the Mormon Church accept it as scripture, but many of them do. And Smith himself said that the book was a, quote, translation of some ancient records purporting to be the writings of Abraham while he was in Egypt, called the Book of Abraham, written by his own hand upon papyrus. Smith claimed that the Book of Abraham was translated from some Egyptian papyri purchased from a traveling mummy exhibition. Unfortunately for him, this is where he made one of his many mistakes. During his lifetime, the academic field of Egyptology was in its infancy. Jean-François Champollion is credited with deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs, which he did in the early 1820s. The Book of Abraham was published in 1842. It could be that Smith didn't realize that scholars would eventually discover that the Book of Abraham really had nothing to do with these papyri because they are absolutely nothing alike. This is because the Book of Abraham was not translated from any Egyptian text. It was born out of Smith's very fertile imagination. One of the most problematic aspects of the Book of Abraham has to do with what has been called facsimile 1. It's a scene that Smith described as an attempt by an evil Egyptian priest to sacrifice Abraham during a visit to Egypt. And this scene can be found on the LDS website, along with an explanation of the various objects and persons it contains. Smith gets virtually everything wrong. One of his biggest mistakes here has to do with 4 objects he identifies as idolatrous gods. These are numbered 5 through 8 on Smith's interpretation of the original papyrus. If you go on the LDS website, you can find a picture of this. In this scene, there is this priestly figure standing over this figure lying down, which is supposedly Abraham. All of this is wrong. And underneath this structure called the funerary couch, this object upon which this person is lying, there are 4 objects that are depicted, and those are canopic jars. These were used to hold the various organs of the deceased after they had been mummified. And each one of them has a different head, and each one represents the 4 sons of Horus. And in each jar, a different organ from the deceased would be placed for protection by the gods. So let's work our way through this scene and look at each one of these canopic jars and kind of figure out what's going on here. In the first jar, here we're working our way from right to left. In the first jar, we see something that has the head of a falcon, and the name of this particular being is Kebesenuef. His role was to protect the intestines. The next jar over has the head of a jackal, and it is named Duamutef. His job was to protect the stomach. Hapi is the baboon-headed jar that's next, and his job was to protect the lungs. And then Imseti is the human-headed jar at the very end. That's on the far left. His job was to protect the liver. We know the names of all of these beings. We know what their jobs were according to Egyptian beliefs. This is where Smith makes some of his most spectacular blunders. So from right to left, he calls it the idolatrous god of Elkanah, the idolatrous god of Libnah, the idolatrous god of Mamakra, and the idolatrous god of Korash. So he gets every single one of these names spectacularly wrong. In fact, scholars understand that this text is actually depicting a mummification. We can tell this by looking at other similar depictions, and we can notice that the human priest, this evil Egyptian priest, is actually the Egyptian god Anubis. The head is missing. That is a key component of this particular depiction. But in the original, there is nothing to suggest that it was anything other than the head of Anubis, the Egyptian god of mummification. We also have to notice that he took quite a few liberties in reconstructing the picture. If you get a photograph of the original papyrus and then compare it to Smith's drawing of the papyrus, the two look very different in several very noteworthy respects. That's another problem for Joseph Smith, who apparently didn't know anything about Egyptian mythology or Egyptian funerary rites. Again, remember, this is a time when Egyptology is in its infancy. The figure lying down in this scene is a person being mummified. This person is lying on an object called a funerary couch, which is where mummified persons and even the god Osiris himself would be laying in various depictions that archaeologists and scholars have recovered from ancient Egypt. Joseph Smith claimed to be a prophet of God, and yet when he is put to the test, he cannot deliver when it comes to validating his status, and that, my friends, is how four gods make a false prophet.